We often assume that holiness is genetic. We look at the great saints of history and imagine that their families were perfect, that their children were born with halos, and that their homes were peaceful sanctuaries untouched by the corruption of the world. We assume that a saint's prayers act like a magical force field, automatically shielding their loved ones from the dangers of sin. But history tells a darker, more terrifying story. The truth is that some of the greatest spiritual battles ever fought were not fought in monasteries or deserts, but inside the homes of the holiest people on earth. Saint Bridget of Sweden was a powerhouse of the faith, a mystic who spoke with God, a woman who rebuked popes and kings. But there was one territory she could not conquer, one fortress that refused to surrender to her piety, the will of her own son, Charles. This is not a fairy tale about a perfect family. This is a horror story for any parent who has ever looked at their child and wondered, if they died tonight, would they be saved? Before we open the doors to the Divine Tribunal and witness the trial that terrified a saint, I want to connect with the community gathering here today. This fear, the fear for the salvation of our loved ones, is universal. It crosses every border and every language. Pause for a moment and let us know in the comments. What city and country are you watching from? Are you watching from the busy streets of New York, the quiet villages of the Philippines, or perhaps somewhere here in Europe? Write it down below. It is a powerful reminder that while we are separated by geography, we are united in this spiritual battle. We are all standing in the same courtroom today to understand the terror of the judgment saint. Bridget saw, we must first understand the man who was on trial. Charles Ulfsson was not a villain in the traditional sense. He wasn't a murderer, a thief, or a blasphemer. If you met him, you would have liked him. He was charming, he was handsome, and he was a warrior. As a knight and a nobleman, Charles walked through the world with the confidence of a man who knows he is important. He loved the weight of his armor, the adrenaline of the tournament, and the admiring gazes of the court. But beneath the shining armor, there was a rot, a spiritual decay that his mother saw clearly, even if the rest of the world applauded him. Charles was a man of the world. He lived for the now. He treated eternity like a distant rumor, something to worry about when he was old and gray. He treated the sacraments as rituals to be rushed through so he could get back to the real business of life: pleasure, power, and prestige. The tragedy reached its boiling point in the city of Naples. In the 14th century, Naples was a city of breathtaking beauty and suffocating corruption. It was a place where sanctity and sin danced together in the streets. Saint Bridget had traveled there on a pilgrimage, dragging her reluctant son along with her. She hoped the holy journey would change him. Instead, the city seduced him. Charles became entangled in the web of Queen Joanna, a ruler notorious for her scandalous life, her court intrigues, and her chaotic morality. The young, ambitious knight was dazzled. He saw a path to power. His mother saw a path to hell. Bridget begged him to turn back. She spent her nights weeping on the stone floors of churches, offering her tears as a ransom for his soul. She warned him that life is fragile, that the thread can be cut at any moment. But Charles was a grown man, drunk on his own invincibility. He likely rolled his eyes at his mother's religious fanaticism, thinking she was just an old woman who didn't understand how the real world worked. And then the hammer fell. It didn't happen with a dramatic battle speech or a heroic charge. It happened with the banality of biology. Charles fell sick. A fever gripped his strong body, turning the warrior into an invalid within days. The strength he was so proud of evaporated. The handsome face that charmed a queen became gaunt and pale. Saint Bridget stood by his bedside, watching the light fade from his eyes. This is the moment every Catholic parent dreads. She wasn't just losing her son to death, she was terrified she was losing him to the devil. She scanned his face for signs of true repentance. Did he regret his vanity? Did he regret the scandal? Or was he just afraid of dying? The dying man mumbled prayers, received the last rites, and then, with a final, ragged breath, Charles Ulfsson died. The room fell silent. The doctors packed their bags. The servants began to prepare the body for burial. But for Saint Bridget, the real agony was just beginning. The silence of the room was heavy, suffocating. She knelt beside his cold body, her mind racing with a panic that only a believer understands. She knew the standard of God's justice. She knew the verse, "Nothing unclean shall enter heaven." And she knew her son was unclean. He had died in the middle of his ambitions, with the dust of the world still clinging to his soul. Had he repented enough? Was his confession sincere, or was it just fear? For days, heaven was silent. Bridget punished herself. The accuser in her own mind whispered, "You saved thousands with your revelations, Bridget. You counseled popes, but you couldn't save your own flesh and blood." She felt like a failure. She prayed not for consolation, but for truth. She needed to know. She begged God, "Show me where he is. Even if it breaks my heart, show me the truth." God answered. But he didn't answer with a warm feeling or a gentle sign. He answered by ripping her spirit out of her body and transporting her to a place beyond time and space. The physical world of Naples dissolved. The walls, the bed, the mourning clothes, all vanished. St. Bridget found herself standing in a vast, terrifying expanse. She was in the supreme tribunal of God. This was not a courtroom of wood and stone. It was a courtroom of light and truth. There were no shadows to hide in. Everything was exposed. At the center sat the judge, Jesus Christ, not as the gentle shepherd, but as the King of Kings, radiating an authority so absolute that the mountains would melt like wax before him. And standing before the judge was Charles. But he wasn't the confident knight anymore. He was stripped of his armor, stripped of his fine clothes, stripped of his titles. He stood naked in his soul, trembling, small, and utterly alone. There was no Queen Joanna to impress here. There were no soldiers to back him up. It was just him and his deeds. St. Bridget watched, paralyzed. She wanted to run to him, to cover him, to defend him as a mother does. But in this place, earthly relationships meant nothing. Only justice mattered. Then she saw the movement in the corner of the vision. Someone else was there. Out of the darkness stepped the prosecutor. The devil appeared. He did not look like a chaotic beast snarling and biting. He looked far more terrifying. He appeared as a legalist, cold, precise, intelligent, and brimming with malice. He looked like an entity who knew the law better than anyone else. He walked into the center of the court with a swagger of inevitable victory. He didn't even look at the judge with fear. He looked at him with a challenge. And he wasn't empty-handed. The devil was dragging something heavy. It was a sack, dark, bulging, and immense. It was the sack of evidence. He dragged it to the front of the throne, the sound of it scraping against the floor echoing in the silence. He looked at Charles with a smile of possessive hatred, a smile that said, "You thought you were free? You were working for me the whole time." Bridget watched as the enemy prepared to open his mouth. She felt the cold grip of despair around her throat. She knew what was in that sack. She knew every moment of vanity, every selfish decision, every lustful glance her son had committed. She braced herself for the slaughter. The trial of Charles Ulfsson was about to begin, and the prosecutor had a list that seemed too long to overcome. The devil pointed a long, dark finger at the trembling soul of her son and spoke the first words of the indictment, words that froze the air in the courtroom. "This soul is mine by right. He wore your cross on his chest, but he carried my spirit in his heart." The courtroom was silent save for the terrifying sound of the devil untying the knot of his sack. He did not rush. He moved with the slow, deliberate confidence of a predator that has already cornered its prey. St. Bridget watched, her breath caught in her throat, as the enemy turned the sack upside down. The contents didn't spill out like physical objects. They spilled out like living shadows, like dark, jagged stones that piled up at the feet of the trembling soul of Charles. Each item was a memory, a decision, a moment in time where Charles had said no to God and yes to himself. The devil picked up the first accusation, holding it up to the light of the judge so that all of heaven could see it clearly. "I accuse him of vanity," the devil hissed, his voice echoing like grinding metal. "Look at this man. He was a knight, yes, but he did not fight for your glory. He fought for his own reflection in the mirror." The devil painted a picture of Charles standing before the mirror in his chambers, obsessing over his appearance, spending hours perfecting his hair and his clothes, while the poor starved outside his castle walls. He loved the admiration of women more than the approval of heaven. He treated his body like a temple, not of the Holy Spirit, but of his own ego. He spent more gold on a single tunic than he gave to the church in a lifetime. If his treasure was his appearance, and his appearance is now rotting in a grave, then he has no treasure left. He is bankrupt. Charles hung his head. He remembered those moments, the pride, the preening, the desperate need to be the center of attention. In the clarity of eternity, his vanity didn't look like fashion. It looked like madness. The devil reached into the pile again and pulled out something darker, heavier. "I accuse him of lust," the prosecutor snarled. He turned to St. Bridget, mocking her with a glance before turning back to the judge. His mother warned him. She told him that the body is sacred, but he treated the bodies of others as toys for his amusement. The devil recounted the nights in Naples, the secret whispers in the court of Queen Joanna, the promises made and broken. He described the sins of the flesh not just as physical acts, but as acts of spiritual theft, stealing the dignity of others to feed a hunger that could never be satisfied. He knew the law, the devil argued. He knew the commandments, but he thought he was special. He thought the rules applied to peasants, not to princes. He drank the cup of pleasure to the last drop, and now he must drink the cup of bitterness. Then came the final, most damning accusation. The devil stood tall, his shadow stretching over the small, naked soul of Charles. "I accuse him of pride," he roared. "This is the root. This is the sin that made me fall, and it is the sin that brings him to me." The devil argued that Charles lived his entire life as if God did not exist. He didn't hate God. He simply ignored him. He made decisions based on ambition, on power, on what would make him great in the eyes of men. He was the god of his own little universe, the devil sneered. He sat on the throne of his own will. "And you know the law, Judge. There cannot be two kings. If he would not serve you on earth, he is unfit to serve you in heaven. He belongs to the kingdom of self, which is my kingdom." The logic was flawless. It was terrifyingly rational. St. Bridget listened to the arguments and felt a cold stone settle in her stomach. She couldn't object. She couldn't scream, "Liar," because he wasn't lying. The devil was using the truth as a weapon to dissect her son. He was quoting the gospel back to Jesus. What does it profit a man to gain the whole world and lose his soul? Charles had gained the world. He had the fame, the women, the armor, and now he had lost his soul. The scales of justice were tipping violently. The weight of the sack was dragging Charles down toward the abyss. The devil turned to the judge, his face twisted in a triumphant grin. "The evidence is presented," he declared. "Justice demands that he be mine. You are the truth, and the truth says he is guilty. Hand him over." Charles looked at the judge. He didn't beg. He knew he had no defense. He looked at his mother one last time, his eyes filled with an infinite apology. An apology for the wasted years, for the ignored warnings, for the arrogance that had led him to this precipice. He saw the darkness opening up beneath his feet, the eternal cold waiting to embrace him. St. Bridget fell to her knees in the vision, her spirit screaming a silent prayer, a final desperate plea to the only authority higher than the law. And then the atmosphere in the tribunal shifted. It wasn't a sound, it was a change in the light. The harsh, clinical white light of justice began to soften, infused with a golden, rosy hue, like the first light of dawn breaking over a frozen landscape. The temperature in the courtroom rose. The scent of roses overpowered the stench of the devil's sack. The devil stopped his celebration mid-laugh. His grin vanished, replaced by a look of ancient primal fear. He took a step back, shielding his eyes as if looking into the sun. He knew who was coming. He hated her name, he hated her power, and he hated that she had the right to enter this chamber. The doors of the tribunal swung open, but they didn't slam, they glided. The Virgin Mary stepped into the court. She did not walk like a humble peasant girl from Nazareth. She walked like the Queen Mother. She moved with a dignity that silenced the angels. She walked directly past the trembling St. Bridget, directly past the cowering Charles, and stood between the accused and the accuser. She looked at her son, the judge, and then she turned to look at the devil. She didn't look at him with anger. She looked at him with the calm authority of someone who has already crushed his head. The devil snarled, clutching his sack of sins. "You have no business here, woman," he spat. The law is clear. The list is complete. He is guilty." Mary didn't flinch. She stood like a fortress. She looked at the devil and spoke with a voice that sounded like water flowing over rocks, gentle yet unstoppable. "You have done your job well, accuser," she said. "You have gathered every stone. You have listed every crime. You have read the list of his darkness." She paused, and the silence in the room was deafening. She reached into the folds of her mantle. She wasn't holding a sword. She wasn't holding a shield. She was holding a small, almost invisible vessel, a vessel containing something the devil had failed to collect. She turned to the judge and continued, "You have read the list of his sins, but a trial is not over until the defense has spoken. The accuser has brought the evidence of his life. I have brought the evidence of his death." Sainty. Bridget watched, stunned. What evidence? Charles had died in a fever. He hadn't done any great works in his final days. He hadn't built a church or given away his fortune. He had just died. What could Mary possibly have? The Virgin Mary looked at the devil, her eyes narrowing slightly. "You are a thorough lawyer, Satan, but you are blind. You look at the actions of the hands, but you cannot see the movements of the heart. You collected the loud sins, but you missed the silent whisper." She stepped closer to the judge. "I call for a re-examination of the evidence. I call for the testimony of the final breath." The courtroom fell into a silence deeper than the grave as the Virgin Mary stepped closer to the throne of the judge. The devil, who moments before had been gloating with the arrogance of a victor, now watched with narrowed, suspicious eyes. He knew the laws of the universe, and he knew that actions speak louder than words, but he had forgotten the one law that supersedes them all, the law of hidden grace. Mary did not hold up a scroll of good deeds, for Charles had few to show. Instead, she held up the invisible, fragile reality of his final second on earth. She turned to the prosecutor and revealed the secret that had been hidden from his prying eyes. She explained that while the fever was burning Charles's body, and while his voice had been silenced by the approach of death, his soul was still awake. In that terrifying space between life and death, when the distractions of the court and the vanity of the armor had faded away, Charles had looked inward. He had seen the wreckage of his life, the emptiness of his ambitions, and the face of the God he had ignored. The devil had seen the silence and assumed it was despair, but Mary revealed that it was not despair. It was a cry. She described to the judge the precise movement of Charles's will. It wasn't a cry of terror, for terror alone does not save. It was a cry of love. Charles had thought in the secret chamber of his heart, "I am sorry, not because I fear the fire, but because I have disappointed you who gave me life." That singular thought, sparked by a grace he did not deserve but which had been purchased for him, was the sigh that Mary had collected. She argued that while the devil had a sack full of years of vanity, she had a single drop of pure contrition, and in the economy of heaven, one drop of love outweighs an ocean of selfish actions. She looked at the judge and declared that the devil had judged the shell of the man, but she was defending the kernel of the soul. The sins were the dust of the road, but the repentance was the direction of the traveler, and Charles, in his final breath, had turned his face toward home. But Mary did not stop there. She knew that justice required a payment. Charles was bankrupt. He had no currency to pay for his crimes. So the Queen Mother reached into her mantle once more and revealed the source of this last-minute grace. She turned to Saint Bridget, who was still kneeling, trembling on the floor of the vision. Mary pointed to the saint and spoke to the judge. "The accuser brings the sins of the son, but I bring the tears of the mother." She presented the thousands of rosaries, the sleepless nights, the fasting, and the desperate weeping of Saint Bridget as a spiritual treasure chest. She argued that God, who is a father, could not ignore the persistent, heartbroken pleas of a mother who had stormed heaven for her child. The tears of Bridget had watered the dry ground of Charles's heart, softening it just enough so that when the moment of death arrived, the seed of repentance could break through the stone. The devil had been fighting against a man, but he had lost against a mother. We pause this trial for a brief moment to speak directly to you. Uncovering these profound historical realities, digging into the ancient texts of the mystics, and bringing these hidden courtroom dramas to light takes immense dedication and resources. We do this because we know that you, like Saint Bridget, are carrying heavy burdens for your own families. We want to arm you with hope. If this mission has touched your heart, if these stories help you fight your own spiritual battles, we ask you to consider supporting this channel. You can help us continue this research by using the Super Thanks button below or by clicking Join to become a member and enter deeper into this community. Your contribution is the fuel that keeps these stories from being forgotten. Just as Bridget invested in her son, we ask you to invest in this truth. The judge looked at the scales. On one side was the heavy, dark sack of the devil, the lust, the pride, the wasted years. On the other side, Mary placed the final sigh of Charles and the tears of Saint Bridget. To the shock of the accuser, the scales did not tip toward the darkness. They tipped violently and decisively toward mercy. The judge rose from his throne. His voice, which sounded like rushing waters, filled the tribunal. He acknowledged the truth of the devil's list. The sins were real, and they could not be denied. However, he declared that charity covers a multitude of sins. He looked at the devil and issued the verdict that shattered the enemy's pride. The sack is void. The devil let out a scream of formless rage, a sound of absolute frustration, as the legal claim he thought he had was dissolved by the heat of divine love. He could not touch the soul of Charles. The claim was cancelled. The prisoner was released from the custody of the Dark One. However, Saint Bridget saw that her son was not sent straight to the high glory of heaven. The judge turned to Charles with a look of severe love. He was saved, yes. The gates of hell were locked against him. But he was not ready for the wedding feast. His soul was safe, but it was dirty. It was covered in the soot of his vanity and the stains of his worldly compromises. He could not stand in the blinding light of God's presence, looking like a beggar covered in mud. The verdict was purgatory. Charles was sentenced to the purifying fire, to be cleansed until the image of God in him was restored to its original brightness. Saint Bridget watched as her son was led away, not by demons to be tortured, but by angels to be healed. He looked back at his mother, and for the first time in his existence, his eyes were clear. There was no arrogance, no vanity. There was only gratitude. He was going to suffer, but he was going to live. The vision faded. Saint Bridget found herself back in the room in Naples, kneeling beside the cold body of her son. The room was the same, the silence was the same, but everything had changed. The crushing weight of terror was gone. She wiped the tears from her face, tears that she now knew had been the currency of his salvation. She didn't stop praying for him. In fact, she prayed harder, knowing now that her prayers were the soap washing him in purgatory. But the despair was dead. She knew where he was. This story is the ultimate battle standard for every parent watching this video. It tells us that the courtroom of God is not a computer algorithm that calculates our bad deeds and deletes us. It is a tribunal where love is the supreme law. You may look at your children today, at their mistakes, their distance from the church, their worldly lives, and feel the same panic Saint Bridget felt. You may see the devil standing there with his list, looking confident. But do not forget the defense attorney. Do not forget that your prayers are accumulating in a vessel that the enemy cannot see. You are building a treasury for them. You are preparing the grace that will ambush them at their final breath. The devil has a list, but the Mother of God has a mantle, and underneath that mantle, even the most broken soldier can find a way home. Do not cease your crying, for your tears are diamonds in the eyes of God, and one day, those tears will be the price of a soul's eternity. Keep watch, keep praying, and trust that the judge who died for your children loves them even more than you do.